All right. Thank you for the intro, Cassie. As Cassie said, my name is Jack Stinogel. I work for the state in Homeland Security and Emergency Management. I'm here to talk to you about the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. This is a program that FEMA has every year. I'll describe that a little bit, and then let's switch to the other screen. Um, we'll also discuss a little bit about mitigation planning, which is what I'm really interested in discussing with you today. But there are a lot of things that FMA can fund. We'll get into that as well. So, uh, HSEM, which is what I'm going to shorten our department to, our mitigation bureau has several grants and funding sources that we work with. There's post-disaster grants for hazard mitigation. There's a couple of annual programs. There's a loan program that we're hoping to get off the ground here in the next few months. And then there's one that Congress can appropriate money to. Today, we're just going to be talking about FMA, Flood Mitigation Assistance. Again, that is an annual grant, so FEMA puts money into this grant every year. It is competitive at the national level, and it is specifically intended to reduce claims against the National Flood Insurance Program. So that's just something to keep in mind as you think about projects that could be funded with this. But mitigation planning is one of those things that can be applied to a broader area and not necessarily just to your NFIP properties. You just have to be sure that there is an opportunity to reduce risk to those properties. So this is just kind of a picture of the relationship that happens with our grants. FEMA works through us to work with local applicants. You'll submit an application, it comes through HSEMD, and then we send it to FEMA. FEMA sends money through us down to applicants, and applicants would be responsible for working with their citizens. This is important because HSEMD is responsible for all of the federal money that comes from FEMA into the state. So we have to make sure that any local governments are spending it correctly, that we're following federal procurement rules, et cetera. And another note that I put on here was that it can take some time. We applied in, I think, February or March of last year, and we're still waiting on those grants to come through for FMA 2023. But the FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, they recently put out a notice of funding opportunity for the FMA 2024 program. The irony is that you'll apply in 25 and probably get it and start your work in 2026, but there it is. So these are the three big buckets of money in HMA, which is this umbrella of hazard mitigation assistance. The hazard mitigation grant program, that's the post-disaster one. That can do a whole lot of different types of projects, but that's not what we're talking about. Let me know if you're interested. BRIC is another annual appropriation, just like FMA. That one is good for really big projects that we can't fit into HMGP because those funds are typically a little more limited. And then there are also some state set-aside funds that we get to decide what we're going to do with at the state level. FMA is an annual appropriation, as I mentioned. The intention is to reduce risk to NFIP insured properties. You also get more federal money. The cost share is increased for repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss properties. So if you've got some of those that you're interested in protecting, FEMA is willing to give us a little bit more money to take care of those. Projects under FMA can be individual. You can be protecting individual NFIP properties, or you can be protecting a whole area that includes NFIP properties. There's a number of different types of projects that we can fund under this. The one that we always love to do is acquisitions, because that is a permanent solution to the problem. We technically can do elevation, but we haven't done that in I don't even know how long. We can do stabilization, floodproofing, retrofitting, and planning, which is what we'll be talking about today. HSEMD is here to help with your application. So if you're interested, just reach out to us, and we'll help you figure out what you're able to do and what we're able to help you with. So getting into the amounts available this year. So FEMA has a kind of a ranked order of how they're going to spend their money. And the first thing that they always fund, they want to spend all of this money before they get to the other stuff. That is, it's what they call CNCB, or capability and capacity building. I put it here under a heading of planning, but CNCB is FEMA's term. So the main thing that we're talking about today is this 50,000 figure. FEMA is giving every state, if they want to use it, $50,000 for local flood mitigation planning, $25,000 per plan. So it's that's really what we're looking at here, is a $25,000 grant. There's also funding for project scoping. So if you've got a project that is going to protect NFIP properties, this is an opportunity to get your design ready, get your application prepared. This will help fund that. That includes benefit cost analysis. That includes engineering and design, things like that. So if you have a NFIP insured property that you're interested in protecting, but you don't know where to start, this might be your opportunity. There's also $300,000 that FEMA has reserved for other CNCB projects. These ones, some of them you'll have an idea of what they mean. Partnership development is kind of a more vague one, but enhancing flood mitigation management, or floodplain management, developing a strategy for RL and SRL properties, as well as substantial damage procedures, and then whatever you can fit under there. As far as doing projects that are actually, construction or acquisition, things like that are going to protect a property, FEMA has $420 million available this year for localized projects. That's protecting the whole area, and that's when you're addressing a community flood risk for reducing NFIP flood claim payments. The cap on that is $50 million per project, and then for the individual one, they've got $120 million. This is nationally, so that's 120 across the country, and that's for mitigating the risk to individual NFIP insured structures. There's no cap on that, but I don't think they're expecting you to spend anything near what they would put a cap on. So the application process in Iowa, again, it goes through HSEMD. That's our department. First thing you would do is submit a notice of interest to us. That lets us know that you've got a project that you want to get funded. We'll evaluate it for eligibility, and then we'll work with you, or we'll give you advice on how you can develop that notice of interest into an application, and that will all be on our EM grant system, which is my.iowahomelandsecurity.org. After that, we will work with you to revise your application, making sure that it is competitive, making sure that it's all eligible work, making sure that everything lines up with FEMA's requirements. Then we will submit it to FEMA. The application is reviewed by FEMA for approval, and then they send us a notification when it's finally ready to move forward. The timeline for the 2024 BRIC and FMA cycle is coming up pretty quick. So in the next couple of weeks, we're going to want a budget estimate, at least, of any projects that you're proposing this year, as well as conceptual design. That's if you're actually doing a project. If you're looking at project scoping or planning grants, that is more, it's a pretty loose, pretty easy application there. Then in mid-March, we're going to want the draft of your application submitted to us in both FEMA Go, which is FEMA's grants management system, and EM Grants, which is our grants management system. We'll work with you from then until about the beginning or middle of April, when we're going to advance these applications to FEMA. And then the final drop-dead deadline, submitting it to FEMA, is end of April. We really don't want to wait until then to submit, though. Again, anticipated awards, not until next year, probably, given that this is a delayed cycle this year. And then there's also just questions about what other delays might happen. Then once you do start work, you have 3 years from the date of award to complete it. All right, so we have completed our discussion about FMA. I know it was really quick, but I'm going to move into mitigation planning now. We'll hopefully have a lot of time at the end for questions. So mitigation planning is, again, what we're hoping that WMAs specifically will be able to use FMA for, because it's this funding that is available to the state that we have not yet been able to take advantage of. The reason that we do mitigation planning is to break the disaster cycle. So as you can see in this picture here, there's this cycle of disasters that emergency managers are familiar with. A disaster happens and you respond to it, then you spend a long time recovering from it. You're also preparing for the next disaster at the same time. And then the next disaster happens and you keep going. What we want to do is to break that cycle by mitigating the risk, reducing the need for response, reducing the amount of recovery necessary, and making preparedness a little easier. This also, the mitigation plan helps us to prioritize our goals and our actions that we want to do to mitigate the risk. And then finally, and maybe most importantly, they are required for any FEMA mitigation grants. So what goes into it is a lot of stakeholder engagement, hopefully. FEMA's been pushing for that, or at least they have been. We'll see what happens in the future. They do want, or we usually include plenty of information on the communities. Most importantly is things like assets that might be at risk from natural disasters. There's also a hazard analysis and risk assessment, and that usually is done on a multi-hazard scale. We're looking at all the hazards that might impact a planning area and then assessing what the risk that each of those hazards poses is. So flooding, tornadoes, drought, fires, etc. For this specifically, FMA only funds the flooding portion. So this would be funding for mitigating flooding or planning to mitigate flooding. Once you've got that risk assessment done, then you develop a strategy to reduce your risks. And then also included in the plan is a little bit on how you're going to monitor the plan's success, what's happening, and then updating the plan in 5 years, because every 5 years, the plans expire. There is no such thing as an extension. This is FEMA's rule. You can get exceptions to the planning requirement for their grants, but there is no general extension for a plan. So we generally want folks to think about 2 years ahead before their plan expires so that we can get some funding ready for them. This usually happens at the county level, so sometimes it's regional. There are some counties where they work together and you've got 2 to 5 counties that have a single plan, but most counties have a county-wide plan. That typically includes all the jurisdictions in the county, the county itself, any cities, school districts, utilities, anyone who's interested in working on mitigation planning and might be interested in applying for funding. These are usually led by the emergency management coordinator, the county's EM coordinator. Sometimes the county itself or the council of governments will take the lead, but the EM coordinator is always involved. Other folks that you want involved are obviously the public. You want public buy-in when you're looking to implement the projects that come out of the plan. There's also several stakeholders that are going to have information on, what issues happen regarding flooding, what issues happen, what kind of infrastructure is at risk, and then what can be done. These are stakeholders that have some information on all of those things. That's public works, that's first responders, public health, businesses and academia, et cetera, the community in general. FEMA also has a lot of very specific requirements about what goes into a hazard mitigation plan. If we were to use FMA dollars to fund a flood mitigation plan update, we would have to follow these requirements. So they're outlined in their local mitigation planning policy guide. They also have a handbook, but the rules are in the policy guide. And they're broken out into these 5 elements: the planning process, which includes participation, the risk assessment, the mitigation strategy, and how the plan is going to be maintained and updated. Now, counties already have a mitigation plan. So the question might come up is, would it be duplicative for a watershed management authority to then write its own plan? In the yes column, that is duplicative. Yes, jurisdictions already have a risk assessment. They've already got a strategy to reduce their flood risk. And a lot of the information, and this is actually a benefit, a lot of the information in those plans could just be copied over into the watershed's plan. The benefit might be mostly that you've got an improved or expanded strategy because, and now we're moving to the no column here, we've got different experts at the table. The mitigation plan is done by the counties. It's usually not necessarily true for Polk County or some of our larger counties, but sometimes it's just the city clerk or just the mayor that's involved in the planning process. So getting a watershed management authority and all of the stakeholders that we have here today, that gets us a whole lot of different ideas. It also offers us an opportunity to integrate some of the plans that are going on, the watershed plan, any water quality improvement plans. We can work across counties because watersheds don't follow political boundaries. We can integrate across the plan types, the hazard mitigation plan, the watershed plan, any other plans going on, as well as integrate water quality and quantity improvement measures. In the hazard mitigation plan, it's typically very much focused, as FEMA requires, on the water quantity. We're focused on reducing risk from flooding. However, and I know a lot of you know this, there's a lot of overlap between what water quality and what water quantity, uh, flood mitigation projects do. The single project can sometimes have impacts on both. So I assume that WMAs have a better idea of that overlap than a lot of the folks that are sometimes involved in just the regular county hazard mitigation plan. This also offers us an opportunity to better integrate into the community rating system. That's the NFIP CRS. Um, Most plans are updated to meet FEMA's requirements for mitigation, but they're not always updated to meet the points that are available under CRS. So doing this might give us an opportunity to increase our CRS points for the communities that participate. And finally, it will hopefully familiarize the WMA with FEMA funds. If we've got a whole watershed management authority involved in creating a plan and we're using FEMA FMA dollars, hopefully by the end of it, you're a little more familiar with the grant process and we'll be able to move forward in funding some other WMA projects using FEMA funds. So that was very quick, but that is all that I've got for slides. I wanted to leave a whole lot of time, hopefully we still have some, for questions, your thoughts, discussion on how you would like to use these funds, if you would like to use these funds. So I'll open the floor to anyone here.
All right, thanks, Jack. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them up in the chat. Otherwise, I guess for this webinar, if you'd like to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask a question too. I do have one request in the chat, Jack, if you wouldn't mind sharing your slides with me and I can email them to the people that attended this webinar today. They had a request for that. Is that good?
Yep. Can do.
Thanks. Okay, there is one question here. What are the restrictions on parcels previously acquired using FMA funds?
If it has already been purchased using FMA funds and there's no property at risk, then my guess is that we're not going to be able to do anything there unless what you're doing on that property is reducing risk to other properties, because that is ultimately the goal of these funds, is to reduce risk to existing property. Hopefully that answers the question, but let me know if you need any further info there.
Hey Jack, this is Ray. That was my question. I guess I was more wondering about if, hey, maybe I should like open that. If I use FMA funds to acquire a parcel, is there like an easement or some other sort of land stipulation that says moving forward you are not allowed to do X, Y, and Z things on it?
Yes. So FMA, pretty much any FEMA dollars that are used to acquire and remove, flood-prone properties, that'll come with a deed restriction. So you won't be able. It'll be an open space restriction. Now there are a lot of things you can still do with open space, but essentially what FEMA wants is that we're not putting, structures there that are going to be at risk of flooding. If you're putting in a prairie, if you're putting in a path, those things are typically still compliant with the open space restriction. I haven't read it yet, but I think somewhere we have some guidance on what can be done with that land.
Thank you.
Thanks. Who should we contact at Iowa Homeland Security Emergency Management to start the conversation about a project?
It would have been a great idea for me to put that on the slides, but I will go ahead and type that into the chat. It'll just be HSEMD mitigation at iowa.gov.
I'll also add that we have Laura Kaser with Polk County Emergency Management on the Zoom as well. I'm sure she would be happy to answer any questions you have too. Laura, do you want to add anything?
Thank you, Cassie. Appreciate being here. And Jack, it's good to see you again. I'd be happy to share my contact information. I can drop it in here. One of the things that I'm working on from my end is encouraging jurisdictions to approve the hazard mitigation plan, and we're making some really good progress there. So that would be one of the first steps that we need to do to make sure that the jurisdiction would be eligible for the funding. Jack, I realize the water managements are a little different, so I don't know if you want to speak to them being a different entity and if there's anything they need to do specifically. But I am here and I'll drop in my contact information and try to be of assistance if people have questions.
Thanks, Laura.
That's a great question. So with watershed management authorities, I don't think we've had a single one that has, officially participated in and adopted a mitigation plan. So you would need an eligible entity to apply for any funding, and then the WMA would be the benefiting entity. So that's how we've typically done it in the past, is you have an eligible sponsor.
All right. Are there any other questions? Like I said, you can type it, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, that's totally fine for this webinar. We'll give them a couple seconds just in case.
Sure.
Are there any example projects you can share?
Example projects. I think there's probably some folks on here that could provide some example projects, but I mean, property acquisition is a big one. If we're talking about planning projects, I have no examples because we have never used FMA for planning. But example scoping projects. I mean, we've had several jurisdictions apply for funding and receive it and use it to, get engineering done on a retention pond, for instance, or, figuring out what the issues are that are making the downtown flood and how can we reduce that? What are the options? Then to even go so far as to develop an application for further FEMA funding. So that's project scoping. That's a pretty handy one. And then as far as projects that we funded with FMA, um, it is largely acquisitions. However, you can do these localized projects that protect a whole neighborhood, whether you're doing that with retention or other watershed approach sorts of things, green infrastructure, um, flood walls, that sort of thing. Can't do levees. Can't call them levees, anyways. But those are things that we can look into.
All right. Any other questions?
I was just going to throw in there. This is Jim Marwoodell. I'm one of Jack's associates at HSEM. Another example, I think I saw that Tori Nimrod was on the call. But we didn't use FMA funding, but wow, it's probably been 7 years ago now that the Iowa Watershed Approach had funding from HUD, and basically they did do something similar where they tied together mitigation plans with flood mitigation at the watershed approach level. And so they did a plan that incorporated with what's the county up there? Alameda or where Decorah is, the other county, where they incorporated a watershed plan with the hazard mitigation plan, and the actions from one plan were listed in the other plan. So there is some examples out there but they just didn't use FMA money at the time. They used HUD money instead.
Thank you.
And you can find that online, and maybe later at another lunch and learn, I could volunteer Tori and Ross to do that for you guys.
Thank you. All right. This is your last chance for questions. Type them in the chat or unmute yourself. All right. Well, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and call it. Thanks again, Jack and Laura and Jim and everyone else who attended our webinar today. Like I said, I can share this on the Rain Campaign's YouTube page, but if you can't find it there, just email me and I'll be happy to send you a direct link. We do have another Lunch and Learn next Monday already, so stay tuned for that. Hope to see you there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.